You're 6 years old, standing in a marble throne room so vast that your footsteps echo like thunder. The purple toga they've draped over your small shoulders weighs more than you do, its fabric dragging on the floor behind you as servants adjust it nervously. Your feet don't reach the ground when you sit on the throne. They've placed a golden footstool beneath them, but it only makes you feel smaller, more like a doll being posed than a ruler of the greatest empire on earth. The men surrounding you are giants, generals with scarred faces and hands that have killed thousands, senators whose calculating eyes measure you like merchants evaluating livestock. Your mother stands beside the throne, her hand resting on your shoulder with a grip that seems protective but feels like a chain. She whispers in your ear constantly, telling you what to say, when to nod, how to hold your small hands to project authority you don't possess. This is Rome in 238 AD, and you are Gordian III, the youngest person ever to hold absolute power over an empire of 60 million souls. Yesterday you were playing with wooden soldiers in your mother's villa. Today those wooden soldiers have become real, and they kneel before you not out of respect, but because your mother's allies in the Praetorian Guard have placed you here as their puppet. The general who kneels before you now, Timesitheus, looks at you with eyes that see through your imperial costume to the terrified child beneath. He speaks formally, addressing you as Augustus, divine emperor, but his words are directed over your head to your mother. You understand in this moment, with the clarity that sometimes comes to children, that you are not the emperor at all. You are the excuse that allows others to be emperor in your name. The purple you wear is not a cloak of power, it's a target, and you're too young to understand that the men who placed it on your shoulders are the same ones who will eventually tear it off, along with your life when you're no longer useful. Welcome to the nightmare of being a child emperor of Rome. Your education as emperor begins immediately, but it has nothing to do with governance or military strategy. Instead, you learn the theater of power, how to sit still for hours during Senate meetings while men 3 times your age debate policies you don't understand, how to sign documents placed before you without reading them, because the letters still swim on the page and you haven't yet mastered reading official Latin, how to smile and wave during public appearances while your legs ache from standing and your bladder screams for relief that isn't allowed during imperial processions. Your real teachers are not the scholars brought to instruct you in philosophy and rhetoric. They are the power brokers who control your schedule, your words, your every movement. Timesitheus, who married your mother within months of your coronation, becomes your most constant presence. He calls himself your advisor, but you see him giving orders to generals, making decisions about provinces and legions, spending the imperial treasury as if it were his own. The Praetorian Guard watches you constantly. These are the soldiers who murdered the previous emperor and his son to place you on the throne. Their commander reminds you of this regularly, in subtle ways that a child's mind understands, as threat even when the words seem friendly. "We made you emperor," he says while ruffling your hair like a kind uncle. "We can make someone else emperor just as easily." You begin having nightmares about the fate of emperors who displease the Praetorians. Your tutors have told you the stories, thinking they're teaching you history, not realizing they're teaching you to fear. Caligula stabbed to death by his own guards. Pertinax killed after just 3 months when he tried to discipline the Praetorians. Elagabalus murdered at 18 and thrown in the Tiber. You're 6 years old, and you fall asleep each night, wondering if you'll wake up or if the guards outside your door will decide tonight is the night to choose a new puppet. The palace becomes a prison decorated with gold and marble. You're never alone, never free to simply be a child. Other children your age are learning to read, playing in gardens, being scolded by parents for childish mischief. You are learning that every person who smiles at you wants something, that every gift comes with invisible strings, that friendship is a luxury emperors cannot afford. The boys brought to be your companions are carefully selected by your handlers, sons of loyal senators who report your every word and action back to their fathers. You try once to play as normal children do, running through the palace gardens with one of these companion boys, laughing and wrestling in the grass. The next day, the boy is gone, sent away because such undignified behavior reflects poorly on the imperial image. You learn to sit still, to speak only when spoken to be the perfect miniature emperor they need you to be. Your mother controls access to you completely. She decides who you see, what you hear, even what you eat. Meals become negotiations, with food withheld or provided based on your obedience. When you refuse to sign a document giving Timesitheus command of an Eastern legion, dinner doesn't arrive. Your stomach growls through the night, but you're stubborn, 6 years old, and testing the only power you think you have. By morning, you sign. You always sign, because you learn quickly that resistance brings not just hunger, but isolation. The servants who are kind to you disappear. The tutor who makes lessons fun is replaced by one who raps your knuckles with a rod. Your favorite foods stop appearing at meals. The small dog you've grown attached to vanishes one day, and no one will tell you where it went. You begin to understand that you own nothing, not even yourself. The palace, the empire, the very clothes on your back, all belong to others who allow you to use them as long as you play your part. The crown on your head is lighter than a feather, but heavier than any burden a child should carry. The public sees you differently than you see yourself. To them, you are divine, chosen by the gods to rule. When you appear on the palace balcony, thousands cheer. When you process through Rome in your golden litter, citizens throw flowers and call out blessings. Children your own age point at you with awe, wishing they could be emperor, not understanding that you would trade places with any of them in an instant. The Senate treats you with elaborate respect that barely masks their contempt. They bow deeply, use all your titles, speak to you in formal language that sounds like reverence but feels like mockery. You see them exchange glances when they think you're not looking, smirks that say they know you're a fraud, a child playing dress up in imperial purple. The few times you try to exercise actual authority, you learn how powerless you truly are. You suggest that a certain senator be appointed to a governorship because you like how he speaks to you as if you're a real person. Your mother and Timesitheus smile and nod, then appoint someone else, explaining later that you misunderstood, that what you thought was your decision was merely you agreeing with their recommendation. You order a slave who dropped a serving tray to be spared punishment. The slave is still flogged, and you're told gently that mercy cannot appear weak, that emperors must maintain discipline. You try to visit the gladiatorial barracks because you're fascinated by their weapons and armor. The visit is canceled for security reasons, but you see Timesitheus tour the same barracks the next week. Every edict, every appointment, every policy bears your name and seal, but none of them are yours. You are the most powerful person in the known world, and you have less freedom than the slaves who clean your chambers. They at least can hate their masters openly in the privacy of the slave quarters. You must smile and wave and pretend that your golden cage is a palace you chose to inhabit. As you grow older, approaching your teenage years, the power dynamics around you shift. Timesitheus has consolidated control, using your name to command legions, appoint governors, and fill the treasury with taxes that pay for his military campaigns. He marches east to fight the Persians, and you're forced to go with him, paraded before the troops to inspire loyalty to a general who rules through a child's authority. The military camp is a revelation of brutality that your sheltered palace life never prepared you for. You see men die from infected wounds, screaming through the night. You watch military discipline in action as soldiers are flogged for minor infractions. You smell the copper tang of blood and the rot of disease. This is the reality of the power wielded in your name, the violence that maintains Rome's borders while you sign papers you barely understand. Times Zethius treats you differently here, away from the Senate's watchful eyes. He no longer bothers with elaborate pretenses of consulting you. Orders are given directly, and you're simply informed of decisions after they're made. You're a mascot, dressed in armor too heavy for your adolescent frame, placed on a white horse during reviews so the troops can see their boy emperor and feel inspired to die for Rome. Then Times Zethius dies, possibly from disease, possibly from poison. No one tells you the truth because no one believes you need to know. What matters is that your primary handler is gone, and in the power vacuum that follows, the generals begin circling like wolves around wounded prey. Marcus Julius Philippus, called Philip the Arab, becomes the new Praetorian prefect. He's different from Times Zethius, rougher, more openly ambitious. He doesn't bother with the fiction of being your advisor. He simply takes control, and you feel the shift immediately. Where Times Zethius at least maintained appearances, Philip treats you like the inconvenient child you are. You're 13 now, approaching the age when emperors might reasonably rule themselves. This should mean growing power, increasing authority, the beginning of real rule. Instead, it means you've become a problem. A child can be controlled with candy and threats. A teenager might start having his own ideas, his own allies, his own ambitions. Philip the Arab watches you with calculating eyes during military councils. You've started asking questions, trying to understand the campaigns being waged in your name. Why are we marching north when the Persian threat is east? Why are we paying tribute to Germanic tribes when Rome should never pay tribute to anyone? These questions annoy him, and he no longer hides his irritation. Your mother's influence has waned with Times Zethius's death. She has no military backing, no legions loyal to her personally. Philip isolates her, limiting her access to you, surrounding you instead with his own people. You begin to understand that you're approaching your expiration date as a useful puppet. The campaigns drag on, and you're marched from one military camp to another, still the figurehead, still the name on the orders, but increasingly aware that you're a problem waiting to be solved. You overhear conversations that stop when you enter rooms. You see Philip meeting with officers in hushed conferences. You feel the atmosphere change around you, the way servants look at you with something like pity. One of your remaining loyal attendants, a freedman who served you since your coronation, tries to warn you. He speaks carefully, in metaphors and historical examples, telling you stories about previous boy emperors who reached adolescence, how Caracalla killed his brother Geta when they were supposed to share power, how Alexander Severus was murdered by his own troops at 26 when they tired of his mother's influence. The lesson is clear. Child emperors who survive to adulthood are statistical anomalies. Most don't make it past their teenage years. The army marches into Mesopotamia in early 24 AD, and you march with it still dressed in imperial purple, still signing orders, still the public face of Roman power. But something has changed in Philip's demeanor. He's no longer even pretending to consult you. He gives orders directly to the legions, makes decisions about battle tactics, negotiates with enemy emissaries, all without informing you until after the fact. You're 14 now, old enough to notice the logistics don't make sense. The supply lines are deliberately overextended. The march routes take you through difficult terrain when easier paths exist. Scouts report Persian forces in positions that suggest they've been informed of your movements. You're not a military genius, but you're not stupid either, and a terrible suspicion begins forming in your mind. Philip is setting you up to fail. Or more accurately, he's creating conditions where failure can be blamed on you, while he positions himself as the solution. It's brilliant in its ruthlessness. If the campaign succeeds, he claims credit. If it fails, the boy emperor takes the blame, and Rome will welcome a strong adult leader to replace you. The soldiers sense something wrong too. Legionaries who once cheered when you rode past now look at you with confusion and doubt. Officers who previously showed respect now barely acknowledge your presence. The camp feels hostile in ways that have nothing to do with the external enemy. You're surrounded by your own army, and you've never felt less safe. One night, you overhear Philip speaking with his officers. He's not even trying to be quiet anymore, as if your opinion no longer matters enough to hide things from you. They're discussing how to handle the transition of power, what story to tell the Senate, how to manage the Praetorian Guard back in Rome. They're planning your removal, and they don't care that you can hear them doing it. The specifics of what happened next are disputed by historians. Some say you died of disease in the military camp. Others claim you were murdered by your own soldiers, possibly on Philip's orders, possibly by troops who simply decided they'd rather follow an experienced general than a teenage figurehead. A few sources suggest you were killed in battle, though no battle is recorded in that time frame. What's certain is that in February 24-4 AD, at age 14, your reign ended. Philip the Arab was immediately proclaimed emperor by the legions. The Senate, receiving news of your death along with Philip's coronation, quickly confirmed him. Your mother disappeared from historical records, likely killed or forced into obscurity. The brief reign of Gordian III became a footnote, a cautionary tale about the dangers of child emperors. But your story isn't unique. You're one of many children fed into Rome's political machinery and ground to dust. Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, was also 14 when placed on the throne, 15 when deposed. Gratian became emperor at 16, assassinated at 24 by his own troops. Honorius was crowned at 10 and spent his reign as a puppet for generals and bishops who wielded real power while he played with chickens in his palace. These child emperors share common patterns. They're crowned during political crises by factions needing a malleable figurehead. They're controlled completely by handlers who rule through them. They're isolated, manipulated, and ultimately disposed of when they become inconvenient. Some survive longer than others, but none actually rule. They're symbols, not sovereigns, props in a theater where the real drama happens off stage. The cruelty isn't just in their deaths, but in their lives. They're robbed of childhood, agency, and identity. They're forced to watch as their names authorize actions they don't understand and couldn't prevent even if they did. They're taught that they're gods while being treated like slaves. The institution of child emperors reveals something fundamental about Roman power. The empire claimed to be ruled by laws and senate, but in reality, it was controlled by whoever commanded military loyalty. A child emperor exposed this truth starkly. The fiction of imperial divinity and authority collapsed when the emperor was obviously incapable of actual rule. Yet the system continued functioning anyway because the emperor was never really necessary. This created opportunities for ruthless exploitation. Generals used child emperors to legitimize their commands. The Praetorian Guard used them to extract donatives, financial payments for their loyalty. Senators used them to advance personal agendas without taking personal responsibility. Everyone benefited from the child emperor system, except the child emperor himself. The sexual dimension of this exploitation is hinted at in sources, but rarely stated explicitly. Ancient writers weren't shy about describing sexual scandals among adult emperors, but they became circumspect when discussing child emperors, suggesting abuses too disturbing to detail. References to certain emperors being kept beautiful for the pleasure of their handlers, to private entertainments that required young and compliant participants, to the unusual attention paid to the physical appearance of boy emperors, all suggest horrors that ancient writers acknowledged through silence. The mothers and female relatives who placed children on thrones weren't necessarily acting from maternal love. Some were ambitious women, seeing their chance at power through a controllable son. Others were desperate, caught in political situations where a child emperor was the only way to maintain their own position. A few genuinely tried to protect their sons, but the system was designed to separate mother from child, to isolate the emperor from anyone who might prioritize his welfare over political utility. The handlers and advisors who controlled child emperors justified their actions through the necessities of state. Rome needed leadership, the army needed a figure to unite behind, the provinces needed an emperor's name on their documents. If that emperor happened to be a terrified child, well, that was unfortunate, but necessary. The child emperors of Rome leave behind a legacy that should haunt us more than it does. We remember the empire's glory, its roads and aqueducts, its legal codes and military victories. We forget the children sacrificed to maintain that glory, the young lives consumed by a system that valued power over humanity. Modern history often sanitizes these stories, presenting child emperors as unfortunate, but treating them as historical curiosities rather than victims of systematic abuse. We note their ages at coronation and death with academic detachment, as if these were merely interesting statistics rather than tragedies of stolen childhoods and truncated lives. The psychological impact of being a child emperor is almost impossible to fully grasp. Imagine being told you're divine while being treated as disposable. Imagine wielding theoretical absolute power while possessing zero actual agency. Imagine watching adults destroy each other fighting for control of your authority while you sit helpless in the center of it all. Imagine knowing that the men protecting you today might murder you tomorrow if political winds shift. Some child emperors internalized their powerlessness and became passive, going through the motions of rule without resistance or initiative. Others, reaching adolescence, tried to assert actual authority and paid for it with their lives. None found a path to genuine autonomy within the system designed to prevent exactly that. The institution persisted because it worked, not for the child emperors themselves, but for the power brokers who used them. It was a perfectly designed system of exploitation that lasted centuries, consuming generation after generation of children while maintaining the fiction of imperial continuity and divine authority. When you sit on a throne at 6 years old, purple draped over your small shoulders, watching giants plot and plan in your name, you learn the hardest lesson history can teach. Power and authority are not the same thing. A title means nothing without the ability to enforce it. And sometimes the golden crown is nothing more than a golden cage that happens to sit on your head instead of around your body. Welcome to the nightmare of being a child emperor, where childhood is the first thing sacrificed, and life itself rarely lasts long enough to reach adulthood.